guys have some really interesting stories, and I think it's important for us to, as cool as you are, not everybody knows you guys, but it's important for us to just give a quick story as to why you believe you're sitting in this chair today. Where did that come from? And Josh, it's interesting, you told me your story starts at just 16.
Yes, so I became a full-time artist when I was 16 years old, and a lot of doors opened for me. I studied when I was 15 with Robert Bateman, a master wildlife artist out in British Columbia, and soon opportunities opened up for me. It was featured on the news, CBC, CTV, and eventually I was able to have solo exhibitions in places like New York City and Los Angeles. But I'm still, proud Canadian and have a studio gallery in Stony Creek where I work out of. And I would say as an artist, I've been somewhat of a practitioner of visual beauty. It's something that has driven my whole artistic practice for me. I have had a great passion for showing the beauty, the particularity, and diversity of the natural world. And so it's interesting how, a rainbow was mentioned, a leopard was mentioned. I think that's, one of the places a lot of people really gravitate to. And as artists, we respond to things that we find are compelling or moving. And so hopefully that's something I'll be able to bring up tonight of why, beauty is important to me, and the artistic angle.
I was going to say, it's interesting because I asked you why animals, and you gave me a unique explanation, but it's almost like you couldn't even really explain it. It was just so beautiful.
Yes.
And it's just interesting to hear when you brought up the leopard. It's like we're trying to explain the unexplainable, but she brought up an animal as well, so I found it so interesting. Abdu, tell us a little bit about your story.
So some of you know it, but I was raised as a Muslim, and I was pretty serious about it. And somewhere along the way, the funny thing happened on the way to the mosque. I ran into these Christians who knew what they were talking about. I was trying to knock the faith out of these Christians, but they knew what they were talking about, and they started to get me thinking about the Christian faith, which I thought was a little on the silly side. To tie it into tonight, what I originally thought of is not just propositionally true in Islam and propositionally false about Christianity. I began to see the opposite, where I started to see things that were propositionally true. Historical facts, philosophical issues, theological issues were true. But I also began to see the beauty in it because it spoke to something that was an inherent desire. There was an existential element to it. So, for example, Muslims, you heard the phrase, Allahu Akbar, right? You heard this phrase. And usually when you hear it, something terrible is on the news or something. The reality, however, is that most Muslims don't say this as a terrorist chant. They don't. They say it every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, as a prayer and praise. It means God is greater. And so if they get bad news, they'll say God is greater. God is greater than this. If they get good news, or they see a blessing, they'll say, Allahu Akbar, God is so great. Look at what he's done for us. Look at the blessing he's given to us. So God's greatness is a central part of Islam. In fact, it's got a name. That phrase has a name. It's called takbir. That's how important it is. It's equivalent to the Hebrew Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. That's the equivalent in Islam, so to speak. So I wanted to believe something that talked about a God who is beautifully great. And I thought the Christian doctrine actually insulted that greatness. But what I began to see was the very things that I thought insulted God's greatness were the very things that demonstrated his greatness. Theologically, philosophically, but also beautifully, existentially. And so the linchpin for me was this idea of God's unsurpassed greatness. And if God is the greatest possible being, then he would express the greatest possible virtue, which is love, in the greatest possible way, which is self-sacrifice. And if you don't know a system of belief if your system of belief lacks that, if it lacks that beauty of expression of the greatest possible virtue, maybe your worldview doesn't really beautifully describe God. But the Christian faith does. And in fact, it does so in word, when it says in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, for God demonstrates his love, his incomparable love, his greatest possible love, his virtue, and that while we were sinners, those who hate God, Christ died for us. So for me, that was the greatest possible being, expressing the greatest possible ethic in the greatest possible way. The beauty there is that's theological, that's philosophical, and it's aesthetic.
You've articulated so well there. Now, to articulate it in a little bit of a different way, Josh's artwork is something that I'm sure as you were walking in, you saw some of his beautiful artwork. One of the things that struck me was the way that the artwork almost extends past the painting, but also it's the way that you cut it. It's so unique. So talk to us a little bit about, we're going to show here, I believe, on the screen here too. Talk to us a little bit about the artwork, because I just think that that's such a unique part of tonight in expressing beauty.
Okay, sure, definitely. So there's a few images here initially. That was from my studio, which it looks out onto the Niagara Escarpment, and I have the Bruce Trail, and I love being surrounded by nature, the chirping birds and squirrels in my backyard. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of where I create my work. These are part of one of my painting series. If you continue, there's a couple of images of the paintings that are here on display. This one is called the Republic, and so this was part of a series which was inspired by the book of Isaiah. There's these zoological motifs of animals taking over abandoned remnants of places like Babylon and other superpowers of the day. And this is a sandhill crane in a Greek temple. And it's toppled Zeus, who would be the god on the pedestal there. And oftentimes, within kind of like a Platonic or Gnostic worldview, humans are really the central focus, and the physical world and animals are usually devalued. And so this is kind of upending that narrative. And the crane is kind of like a Christ symbol for like eternal life and resurrection. There's also a shadow of the crucifix, if you notice a cross right on the ground there. Moving on, so this was the final painting in the series. This is a great big painting, 6 by 8 feet, so I couldn't have it on display here.
How long did that one take you?
This one took 1,700 hours. So I should say, like, it takes a patient attention to detail to create these hyper-realistic paintings in oils painted on birch. So it took roughly about 8 months of full-time work to complete. And so all of the animals from the series return. So the crane is in the background there, and they're all surrounding the slain lamb. And so within art history, the motif of the suffering lamb harkens back to the prophecy in the book of Isaiah chapter 53 about how Christ, it foretells the suffering servant who would be like an innocent suffering lamb who would be slain to save humanity from their sins. And so I was also thinking, though, how there's great beauty that can come out of suffering. Isaiah talks a lot about like beauty from ashes, and that there's this messianic foretelling. And the animals surrounding the throne, it echoes the final book in the Bible, book of Revelation, which is this vision of the new heavens and the new earth, where the animals on the earth and the sea and the sky will surround the Lamb and give praise and honor. And so I think for me, my work really is also like theological. I'm really interested in the realm of symbolism and hope, and so that's what I love about art, is that it can you can delve into really interesting topics that way. So that's how for me personally I can kind of express my faith. I think we'll move on to the next paintings. So this was from my last painting series called Vanitas and Viriditas, which is Latin for basically vanity and vitality. And so half the paintings have this character named Kohelet, who is inspired by the teacher, the Solomon-like figure in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is in the Old Testament, the Jewish wisdom books. And this character in my series is a modern interpretation of that, and he's a wanderer, and he is trying to pursue the meaning of life, and he's finding so much of smoke and mirrors, but then he's attracted to the beauty of the sunflower, and he's interested in science and how 80% of biological growth forms in spiral formations following the Fibonacci sequence, and so you can see that even in the sunflower. And so there are some scientific elements here, and the mystery that he's trying to pursue. He talks a lot about in Ecclesiastes that there's a time to be born, a time to die, but that God has made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set eternity in the human heart. And so we have this wrestling inside of us for the eternal, and beauty is what taps into that eternal realm, because we come and go, but beauty still remains. And so if you continue to the next figure, so this is kind of the counterpoint to Colette. So this is Lady Wisdom from the book of Proverbs. And it talks about how in Proverbs 8 that Lady Wisdom delights in creation, in the beauty. She rejoices with the human family, all that God has created. And so this was then to show, you'll see here, there's a marvelous chula-tail hummingbird, which is a Peruvian bird that truly has those long tails that extend. And so the paintings where she appears, you see a lot of bright and colorful hues, and her paintings represent like the virtues of wonder and awe, which I think that's the beginning of beauty. We can continue to the next piece here. So this is my painting, Greening the White Cube, and I wanted to include this one because in this scene you have Sophia entering an abandoned art gallery, and traditionally art galleries have been a place where beautiful paintings and sculptures were on display, but in this scene you have iconic works of modern art that are very much celebrating ugliness. There's a quote by Willem de Kooning, his work, Woman One, which is on the right wall there. He says, "Beauty becomes petulant to me. I like the grotesque. It's more joyous." And so, unfortunately, there's been kind of a turn away from beauty in the art world. It's actually even become a taboo topic where artists can't sincerely say that they're pursuing beauty. And so this work is contrasting what I see as wisdom's message, which is embracing the beauty of creation and turning away from how, unfortunately, in a lot of contemporary art, these famous artworks have been kind of symbols of just like wealth and status, and kind of pushing us away from nature to give greater precedence to the human and industrial kind of masculine complex. One more painting, I think, at the end. So this is the final work from the series, Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And so this is the only painting where Sophia and Colette converge. And so Colette's world is represented by the Zen rock gardens, which are to represent the meaninglessness of life that is common in the Zen Buddhist worldview of nothingness. And so there's some crossover with what he thinks and is pondering about how we need to free ourselves from the worldly attachments that can grab a hold of our hearts and distract us from the existential realities of life. but you see that there's a blue morpho butterfly on his shoulder, and I saw that as an emblem for drawing him into this portal where Sophia comes out of, which is the new creation or paradise, and that realm is breaking into his kind of nihilistic world of despair. And she represents, truth, beauty, and goodness, which are these, transcendentals that have, for thousands of years undergirded kind of a Judeo-Christian worldview. There's a lot of symbolism in the portal as well, and the Cairo symbol at the top. But I've been talking for quite a while now, and
I'm fascinated by listening to just I think art with no context, your art is still beautiful, but when I look at it and then I get the context behind some of it, oh my gosh, it just makes it so much more unique in that way. I think it's important to begin more of our deep dive discussion into why we even chose to talk about the topic of beauty. There's this, again, we can't explain it. So Abdu, I'm just curious to ask you, we were exploring this conversation of beauty. We had a conversation yesterday about it, planning how we wanted to approach this conversation. What would you say is the reasoning behind why beauty is evidence for something?
Yeah, so there's actually classical arguments for God's existence based on the idea that beauty even exists. Now, this is interesting because, you hear this phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which suggests that beauty is inherently subjective. So what I might find beautiful, someone else might not find beautiful. And we have phrases like, only a face a mother could love, that kind of stuff. We have these ideas of subjective beauty, but everyone else is like, not so much. And so we think, well, how can that be an objective proof for God's existence? It's important to understand this idea, this argument is not about something being beautiful and therefore that proves God's existence, because that is subjective. What you think of as beautiful is subjective. Rather, that beauty at all exists, that human beings can perceive beauty at all, is evidence that there is something inherently and objectively beautiful laced throughout the fabric of the universe, which suggests that there is something of an artistry or some kind of a mind behind the whole endeavor in the first place. So it's beautiful, and you might see something as beautiful different than I would see it as beautiful, but that you see beauty at all is evidence that there is a mind behind all of this. Because minds react to beauty. Yes, animals can react to beauty in certain ways, but they don't actually appreciate the beauty. So a leopard sees another leopard, and there's a male and female thing. They don't fall in love. There's not the male leopard doesn't think to himself, man, I am so lucky to have this one. They just don't do that. They don't see the ineffable beauty. In other words, another leopard can't appreciate the beauty of a leopard that you appreciated. Because there's something about your mind and your non-physical aspects that ring true with something that is beautiful even when it's not you. And that suggests that beauty as a concept is a concept that is born of minds. And if beauty exists objectively, then it's born of an objective mind. And that objective mind is exactly what we mean when we talk about God.
I wanted to ask, I don't have this one written down, but Josh, in the modern day, you brought up that one painting. It was an interesting quote. You used the word grotesque. How have you seen the terminology for beauty shift just in your years of being an artist, or even just different locations you've been a part of with different cultures mixing in? Yeah. How has the definition changed for beauty?
Yes. That's a great question. So one of the arguments for why beauty is seen as problematic is that some would say it distracts us from social injustices, whereas beauty is kind of has a pacifying element to it. The other reason would be that we then fetishize objects or persons that are beautiful that can be like destructive. And so the thing that I find, and one of the other reasons that unfortunately, going back to like 18th century philosophers like Immanuel Kant in his Critique of Judgment, he defended beauty, but it was a Western taste of beauty that was seen as the pinnacle, and so like primitive art was seen as having no taste or a civilized sensibility, and so that's why beauty has had a bad taste. And then obviously you think of like Soviet era art, which a lot of propaganda uses beauty in order to convey a certain utopic message of the ideal society that they're trying to project falsely. But I think that's a misunderstanding of beauty, that beauty is only for the elite or bourgeoisie. And I think what's interesting is that of all people, Jesus began his ministry quoting from the book of Isaiah, and he talks about how the Spirit of the Lord is on me to proclaim good news for the poor, to set the oppressed free. And that's a direct quote to Isaiah 61, which also says to bestow a crown of beauty instead of ashes. And so there's this idea that actually beauty ennobles the downtrodden. There's also a philosopher who's, secular philosopher, Elaine Scarry in her book on beauty and being just, that beauty decenters us. It makes us think that there's more to life than just us, that there's beauty out there. It corrects us. And it also compels us to protect that thing or person who's beautiful. And so I think there's actually been an increasing openness to beauty in the art world that is encouraging. And there's much more I could say about that.
Well, yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a thought about this, because when you were talking about the one painting where we had talked about that painting, I had the unique honor and pleasure of basically walking through that entire gallery with the artist, which is just something you don't get to do very often. So what a blessing there. We were talking about the different pieces that were in the abandoned art gallery and how ugly they were, and how there was a celebration of the ugly, because that's somehow authentic and real, and you're being real when you're being a cynical person. That's a reflection of the spirit of the age, where it's considered deep to be a skeptic. If you believe in things that are ethereal and beautiful and these kind of things, you're seen as a pie in the sky Pollyanna type. But if you believe in these skepticisms, and the world is a harsh, ugly place that we have to sort of beautify, the problem is that when you focus on one thing only, and it's just skepticism, there's not a better story coming. It's just skepticism that leads into, which might have started off with a beautiful cause, but ends up devolving into skepticism for skepticism's sake. And it persists and it lasts and it never seems to go away.
And I think what also happens is that people are impugning beauty, but really they have an issue with sentimentalism, which really, like if you think of Thomas Kincaid paintings of cottages or art that's trying to sell you something that isn't true, and so that's valid. I think there is a critique of that, and that beauty can be used for improper purposes when it's unmoored from truth. So we have to have a proper understanding of beauty.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting. You guys kind of transition to my next question about beauty being innately in us. And it's when you bring up people or skeptics trying to skepticize the idea of beauty, it's like they're trying to fight this thing that's innately in them. It's actually a challenge to do that. Like, how hard is it to look at a sunrise on a perfectly clear day or a little bit cloudy where you've just got like this painting across the whole sky and say, ew? Like, really? that actually takes effort to do that. And so because it takes effort, I'm also curious to know, are we able to, is the fact that we can't or that we have to fight the idea of beauty to be a skeptic prove that it's innately in us? Like, is it just innately in us to identify beauty and seek it out? Yes, subjectively, sometimes in our own way, but objectively that it still exists?
Well, I would take a look at the Garden of Eden story, right? So you have literally two people planted in the most beautiful setting that can possibly be, and they live contented with that until the serpent, the most crafty of the creatures, comes in and says, did God really say? And sort of lies. Did God really say, you shall not eat of any fruit of the garden? Well, of course God didn't say that. But then Adam and Eve respond and say, oh no, God said we can't even touch this one. He didn't say that. And so ugliness creeps in, because what is going on here is there is a recognition of the beauty around them. They've lived in that beauty for how long, who knows. And then, in that moment, they succumb to an ugly thing, which is the desire for autonomy, which is the desire to overtake God, to be the God of God. And that's when everything falls, and that's when everything begins to, when ugliness begins to creep into the world, and struggle begins to happen, and that which God meant for beauty. Of course, and even the Bible says in Genesis 3 that God walked and talked with them in the cool of the day. You can't get more beautiful than that. And so there is a sense in which we recognize the beautiful because we are made, Genesis 1:27, in God's image, and God being the ineffably beautiful source of all of existence, we would naturally see beauty and react to it. But because of human rebellion and because of the desire to want to actually be more ineffable, more inexpressible in our beauty than God himself, which is a Luciferian thing to do, that's what Lucifer wanted, is to sort of overtake God's beauty with his own magnificence. We also look for things that are ugly because we want them to be beautiful because we say so. So there's two competing things in humanity: the recognition of the beautiful and the desire to turn that which is not so beautiful into something beautiful because we say so.
I want to ask you this question, Josh. How do we allow just this innate sense of beauty to take us over? Like, because you so clearly do it in your paintings. How do you just allow that to be the thing that pushes you and motivates you and encourages you to do that? Because I think, beauty also comes in the way that you live life. And the contentment that you have with life is just allowing the beauty of which we live in every single day to be our main focus. And that's where ugly creeps in. When we don't allow that to be our main focus, it pulls us away from natural creation, which is so beautiful. But what would you say to that? How can somebody allow their innate sense of beauty to continue to take over and be the source of their joy?
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing that is unique about beauty is that in some ways it's kind of useless, and and I say that because we live in a very pragmatic society, very utilitarian, where we look at the world in a way of just progress, technology. Trying to achieve things in the easiest route possible with the greatest amount of speed, and beauty kind of questions that narrative, that drive that we're kind of forced into, because beauty is something that is gratuitous in the sense that it's an overabundance, but it makes life worth living. And so for me, beauty also, like in my own work, what I try to do is to get people to slow down. And with my paintings, I spend hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 hours painting a scene, because I'm really trying to meditate on what I'm looking at. That's why going on a hike in the woods or appreciating the flowers and birds in my garden is something that I try to incorporate and see as an extension of my artistic practice, because I think that helps me kind of slow down and contemplate the beauty that's all around, that there's more to life than the bottom line, so to speak.
Well, that's why I love so much. I said this is, you can walk by some of your paintings and go, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful, and then just keep walking, right? But then when you stop and understand the context, you stop and you think, and then you think a little bit deeper, and then you think even deeper, and that beauty just allows us. It's so funny how it's so natural for us to just get lost in the beauty if we just take a moment to allow ourselves to. Right?
Yeah.
One of the things, Abdu, I wanted to ask you this. You kind of brought this up, but I'd like you to go into it a little bit more in depth, because for some of the people in this room, you might have a argument, or even like what I like to do when I'm learning something is I always think of every other way that you could be wrong.
Yeah.
And I try to figure out the answer in my own head for how that could be wrong. And then if all of those answers are answered, then I'm like, okay, that's right. how would you say other worldviews answer the question of why beauty moves us so much? Other worldviews.
Yeah, so if I would look at a naturalistic worldview, for example, so the argument I gave about God's existence, beauty as being an evidence of God's existence, not full-blown proof, but evidence of God's existence. A naturalist might say, well, it's just an evolved characteristic. So it was evolutionarily helpful for our ancestors to propagate the species by recognizing certain things as beautiful. So someone might say, well, certain berries are beautiful, and so you evolved to be attracted to the way a strawberry looks or certain kinds of berries look because they're nutritious. And other things are grotesque looking and they happen to be poisonous. And so we evolved a sense of beauty to avoid eating poisonous things and going towards things that are beautiful. There's a reason why we don't think frogs are beautiful, because they taste terrible and they're poisonous in some respects. That's what they might say. Or insects, for example. We might think that they're grotesque and ugly because they either can infect us with diseases or they themselves are poisonous. That's what a naturalist might say, is that beauty is not really a phenomenon that speaks to a divine mind. It just speaks to natural selection. Another way to look at it, though, as well, is to say, well, beauty is what's called an epiphenomenon. It's just a fancy word to say it's a phenomenon that arises because two other things happen at the same time. This happens in music, where you have like a harmonic thing, where you have two people playing music, certain notes, and then those notes, when he's playing this and she's playing that, and when they play them together, this other thing happens. This harmonic happens that none of them played. They'd say that's beauty. Beauty just arises as a result of human consciousness. And so in order to I don't know, distract ourselves or to give ourselves something to do, beauty isn't useful evolutionarily. It just kind of happens.
Can I just ask you, so immediately my brain goes to, well, that seems almost surface level, even the harmonic thing when you brought up two different notes coming together and then they make something that just sounds beautiful.
Right.
But we still don't have the common denominator for what that harmonious two notes is for beauty. Like, we wouldn't be able to identify that note that those two notes together makes and say that that's beautiful without a common denominator of something in us.
Well, there's multiple responses to the arguments I just gave. One of which is that they're ad hoc, and you're hitting on that. An ad hoc explanation is an explanation that might sound reasonable but has no actual basis for it. You just said it. You just said it because you said it. And it could be that. Sure, it could be that, but is it more likely to be that? Until you give good explanation and good reasons why beauty, the perception of beauty is an epiphenomenon that just kind of happens, you can say, could it be that? Sure. Is it likely? You have no idea. Or is it better to say that beauty, which gives meaning and doesn't actually do anything other than, and I'm not talking about appreciating the beauty of a figure. So for example, an evolutionist might say, well, you appreciate the beauty of the human figure because when you look at a person who looks strong and broad-shouldered and abs that won't quit, that kind of a thing, you're thinking that's a good mate to produce more offspring. Or this beautiful woman is obviously a good woman who could, produce more offspring and foster more genetic material into the future. But again, that's ad hoc. It sounds okay, but do you have evidence of that? Is there any real evidence of it? In fact, there is an atheist philosopher, atheist writer, I should say. His name is Raymond Tallis. He wrote an excellent book that I think everyone should read, whether you're a Christian or an atheist or not, called Aping Mankind. And he talks about two competing cultural issues. One he calls Darwinitis, and the other one he calls neuromania. Now he's a neurologist actually, and he believes in evolution, but he says that when you look and you try to explain everything through Darwin, it's just Darwin, like a Tourette syndrome. You just keep saying Darwin to every explanation. It's called Darwinitis. It's ad hoc. You just take things, and he made a point. He said, I'm not going to quote him exactly, but it was a good quote. He's a pretty funny guy, actually. And he says, when you automatically go towards the idea that beauty results because it helps you to propagate, then you have some of the greatest artists in the history of the world who, didn't, procreate. They spent all their lives creating this beautiful art, and they suffered for this art. And sometimes they suffered in either ignominy or obscurity and to produce this art that we find beautiful today. And he made a point. He said how disappointing it would be for Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin to find out that their art was really meant to just pull chicks. You know,
I'm still single, so.
But devilishly handsome, by the way, and a great head of hair. So I think that so it's ad hoc. In fact, it's interesting that even Richard Dawkins, the world's most famous atheist, whether he's the most cleverest atheist is another issue, but he recently said that he finds himself to be a cultural Christian. He says, I'm a cultural Christian, and I respond to it on our YouTube channel, and he says, I rather would find it sad if we lost the architecture, the art, and the music that Christianity inspired. If we lost, he says, I love the hymns, I love the art. Well, that comes from somewhere, Richard.
Can I you answered the follow-up question that I was going to try and challenge you on, but of course you already answered it. It was, who's to say that, you may be saying that, there's beauty is evidence for a God who created us out of his own image and beauty. Mm-hmm. Who's to say that that's not just who's to say that that isn't? But you kind of answered it. It's well.
There's more to it than that. Josh,
yeah,
okay.
Clue.
No,
because I just wanted that was one thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If I put religion aside, and I'm speaking directly to the skeptic here. You do have to come to terms, just for one, the archaeological evidence of Homo sapiens. You see the cultural explosion. We see evidence of cave paintings in the Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic of bulls and reindeer and religious rituals that are creative. And then just the reality of the size of our brains, which are we have an overabundance of capabilities. Even like a secular evolutionary biologist Kevin Lalonde says that it's basically Darwin's unfinished symphony is trying to make sense of the exceptionalism of
Did he
human
use
beings.
the word symphony?
Yes.
See, just that wording choice, because a symphony is what?
It's art.
It's art. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting how that it's just innately said. Like, that's so unique.
So then it's like, well, why? Why do we have such a unique capability within the entire animal kingdom for creating art, for symbolic thinking, for appreciating these things, which I think are over and above just their mere utility. I think even like within the natural world, you have plenty of examples of this. The beauty of birds that attract a mate, or there's these bowerbirds in Papua New Guinea and Australia who create these elaborate nests that are color coordinated with even plastics and flowers. They're amazing if you check them out online. It goes over and above the mere utility.
Like, they themselves can almost identify.
It's not to say like that. To what extent they have a consciousness to appreciate the beauty. I think that's something humans uniquely have. But the fact that there's so much beauty, even that humans we haven't been able to see with our own eyes, that gives evidence that there's a beauty just for the sake of beauty. And if you're looking at it from just a secular perspective, beauty is just something that is subjective. There's nothing objective about it in an eternal sense. From the Christian perspective, is that God is a God of love and creates for no particular person. The artist Makoto Fujimura, who's an acquaintance of mine, has a really excellent definition of beauty in his book Culture Care. A Christian understanding of beauty begins with the recognition that God does not need us or the creation. Beauty is a gratuitous gift of the Creator God. It finds its source and its purpose in God's character. God, out of his gratuitous love, created a world he did not need because he is an artist. And so it's more than just for scarcity or drudgery. So it's something that is abundant and expansive, and that's what love is.
And it's not, and this is where we get to the non-ad hoc part, because this depth of where it comes from, this idea of just giving something for the sake of giving it.
Yeah.
You have a Trinitarian God who, this is, by the way, uniquely Christian, and you're going to see the irony here. There's a nested irony in the Trinity, which is you have one God existed in three persons. So one being with three centers of consciousness, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They're eternal, yet they're not each other, if they share the same nature. Now, there's an explanation for this, so we can get into that later, I suppose. But what you have is a God who exists as one being in relationship. Now, if God is great, going back to my own journey, if God is truly great, then he would need nothing to be who he is. And the Bible describes God, and you would think that the greatest possible being, if God exists, would be a being who would be a relational being. He would be loving, he would be compassionate, he would be kind, he would be, all these things. He would be quintessential to who God is for him to be relational. If God is one and only one, like there's no differentiation whatsoever in his personhood, then when nothing else existed but God, he needed to create something in order to be relational towards it. And a God who needs something cannot possibly be the greatest possible being. But the Trinity solves it because the Father loves the Son, and the Son loves the Spirit, and the Spirit loves the Father and the Son. And on it goes from eternity in the community of the Trinity. So God never needs anything. So he creates us, and Fujimura is so right in saying that he doesn't need us because he has relationship in and of himself. So when he creates you and me, it's not so that he can have relationship, it's so that you can have relationship. It's gratuitous, and that's beautiful. So the very elegance of the Trinity is itself a beautiful form of existence, which is philosophical, theological, existential, and aesthetic. And it's giving. That's just beautiful. It's just, you inherently recognize it. You just do. And so there's that, so it's not, so beauty as an argument isn't ad hoc because the argument isn't deductive. It's not saying beauty exists, you could argue this way if you wanted to. You could say objective beauty exists only if God exists. Objective beauty exists, therefore God exists. That's syllogistically logical and flows and it's sound. But that's not the argument we're making. We're making what's called an abductive argument. It's a fancy way to say it's an inference to the best explanation. We experience beauty. The best explanation isn't epiphenomenon. It isn't evolution. Those are possible explanations, but they aren't the best one. The best explanation is that our inherent recognition of beauty, and only minds recognize beauty. Only minds. Not computers, not chairs, not paramecium, not dust mites, and certainly not other animals. They don't recognize beauty. Only minds recognize beauty, which is an argument for beauty coming from a mind. So it's not ad hoc, it's the best explanation, and it's even better in the Christian view as opposed to other theistic worldviews because the Trinitarian God makes sense of beauty in its very existence.
You talk in poetry.
That's ironic.
Just a thing that I was thinking when you were saying that last comment there was, when we talk, I just did a show on artificial intelligence, and I was sitting down with two Silicon Valley guys who just, big in AI, created a AI brain. And I asked them, I said, is it even possible for AI to ever have a moral code? Because we can't even really explain what that is. Like, that's even hard in itself to explain. And then with that moral code comes love and beauty. And how can something that we think we can create, that's the funny part, is we think we can create something that God created in us. We think we can create that same and replicate that, but I think we'll soon find out that we can't.
Yeah.
For the main reasons that there's no moral code, it can't love. And on top of that, it doesn't identify beauty. It's irrational to think that you can just create something that just so inherently identifies beauty, to think that a machine could do that. It's a little off topic, but it is where my generation thinks it's headed.
But this is so important, and I'd love to hear your views on this too, because you're hitting a thing really important. is that AI will be able to tell you if something is beautiful. It doesn't recognize its beauty. It's just telling you what other people thought was beautiful, and it's mimicking it.
Yeah.
It is a great simulacrum. It is the great mimicking machine. In fact, it was Tomasz Chmura-Music who said AI is just a prediction machine. It just analyzes patterns, predicts what you'd like it to say, and then says that thing. So it looks like it's doing something. It looks like it's creating. It looks like it's identifying beauty. It looks like it's creating a poem in the style of Robert Frost. It's not. It's stealing from a bunch of human beings and cobbling together this thing, which is at best a simulacrum. Is it useful? Oh yeah. But is it actually doing something? No, it's not.
Okay, can I just ask one question? It's not, I mean, but I feel it's on topic, right, David? I sure hope so.
We'll find out.
He might come up here kicking me off. AI in art. That is something, like, I can go on ChatGPT right now and tell it to, I can show it what you created and then say, hey, create this except replace Sophia with, something different. What do you say to that? Because he's now saying AI will just replicate and use patterns, but will it ever actually be able to create something that is inherently just beautiful?
Yeah. Well, I mean, AI is something that has definitely affected my whole world. Artists, even I was in a competition fairly recently where an AI-generated painting won an award, and it was specifically not for digital art. It was traditional media. So there's this great big controversy because it got past the judges, who are like trained to have a discerning eye to detect these kind of things, and they even said there were dozens of other works that they did catch. So this is becoming very real, and the question of really what is art is kind of on the table, and being reevaluated. I think I echo what Abdu shared. I think it's actually causing us to question what does it mean to be human, because that hard problem of consciousness just is not going to go away, and even if there can be robots and AI generators that can create work better than any human can, and I fully see that's possible, and it's developing so quickly. Now they're making full major motion picture films using AI generators that who knows where it's going to go, but still the question remains, like, what does it mean to be human, to experience beauty? Because I'm very certain that the AI algorithms, they're not conscious. They can't behold beauty.
Well, and just one observation. I can tell you have something you quickly want to add. But one observation that I will make is that I could walk through your pieces of art, and I'll be honest. If I just thought it was a picture, and it was, let's say, AI generated, it loses significance. And this goes back to this, and I'm just speaking behalf on me. I find beauty in the creation of something. And that, when you were talking about that, AI creating something, the beauty in creation is not, yes, what was created was so beautiful, but to me the significance it holds is that it was created. It was created with a defined purpose.
Yeah.
Like, that is the beauty behind it. And so when I said to you, I said, what to me is so beautiful is, yes, you paint beautiful pictures, but understanding the story behind the creation of those pictures is truly what makes it beautiful. And I would argue that every collector that's purchased your piece of art has heard the story behind that creation of that art.
It is very interesting that even as digital art has become more mainstream, like NFTs were a big craze, and there's that whole Beeple work that got auctioned off for millions of dollars, that's still, like, I think collectors, at least my collectors, really do appreciate that there's a person behind the art, that there's also a story, that there's also a relationship that they can have with me, and I think that's what's beautiful about art, is it's something that is enjoyed tangibly in person with people. I'm not against using technology as a tool. I think it's very beneficial, but it would be a great shame if it takes away what really makes life enjoyable, which is creating and thinking and creating these things that unfortunately the pleasures would we don't want to outsource those things to.
Abdu, I want to let you add something before we move to the last question.
Just really quick. So there's an article. I got involved in the whole AI discussion because of the art thing. A guy entered into an art contest. It's very famous, by the way, painting, where he entered into an art contest. It was a digital art contest, so it wasn't a traditional medium. But he didn't use like a stylus or a digital thing. He just kind of like typed into Midjourney, and this image came out, and it won. And it actually truly is a pretty cool image. And he won. They found out he had used Midjourney, and the judges let him keep it, the first place prize. And all the artists were like, wait, hold on a second. And he said this curious phrase. He said, art is dead. This is an artist talking, by the way. He said, art is dead, AI won, humans lost, get used to it. And I thought, what a weird thing to brag about. What an odd thing to boast about, your own obsolescence. The very thing that makes us human, he's saying, we're done with that now. Why would he do that? That goes back to the garden story of Adam and Eve. Why is he bragging about it? He's not bragging about the fact that AI is better at art than us. What he's bragging about is that we made something that God himself couldn't make. God could not make a being better than himself. And we created a being that is godlike. So we finally got it over on him. We finally did now what we couldn't do in the garden. And that's why he's bragging. But there was an article in response, and I thought it was such a good article, and it was called My Art Will Go On. And it was based on the Celine Dion song from the Titanic, My Art Will Go On. And he gave two reasons. One is that artists do art. They don't feel defeated by someone else doing it. You create your art because that's who you are. That's an expression of the God-given gift, and that's who you are. And people will buy human-made art because artists made it. So you were talking to us about one of your paintings, and you shared with me before about the very large painting with the whale. And it is breathtaking when you see it, and then you hear his story. He painted it during one of the toughest times of his life, and now the painting's better. The image that won that contest, that AI, Midjourney, has never gone through a midlife crisis. Midjourney has never wondered if I'm ever going to find the right lady. Midjourney has never wondered about its own mortality. It never does that. And so its art is just, visually pleasing at first. And I remember seeing that thing and thinking, wow, look at that thing. And then losing all interest.
It's like the meaning of it is the creation, the unique creation behind it.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
And it's inspiration. There's something to it.
No soul. There's no experience.
Yeah. So my last question that I wanted to end off with, because we talked a lot about visual beauty, but we didn't touch too much on experiential beauty. And I think I would argue, well, no, it's equal, it's about 50-50 you could say in your life. But I go on a hike, go down to the gorge, and I enjoy looking out at over a cliff, looking at the water, looking at Niagara Falls, etc. Right? And I think it's interesting though, because you can look at that, it's visually appealing, but then when somebody's next to you and you're watching it with like a loved one or a family member, whatever it may be, it just beautifies the experience even more. So one of my questions was, how is beauty translated through human connection? And Josh, I want to let you start with this because you are obviously an artist, and can I say this? You love your time in the studio, listening to your heavy metal, and enjoy.
Occasionally.
I didn't know that.
And your country. But just that idea of just human connection. How is it translated through beauty?
So I think what's interesting about the Christian faith is that not only is it intellectually satisfying, and we heard a beautiful description of the Trinity and incarnation, these really amazing doctrines that are satisfying, but that it's lived out experientially. And so I think there's kind of like a parallel there with enjoying and experiencing art together, as well as being in community together. And so I think for the Christian story, the Christian faith to be regarded as truthful, it needs to be seen as viable as well, to be lived out. And what I love, and personally what attracts me to the Christian faith is this story arc of creation, of the fall, of redemption, and that the Bible presents us not just with abstract arguments or propositional truths, although that's very important, but that it's part of this beautiful, masterful story that we get invited into. One of my favorite quotes by the author of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, J.R.R. Tolkien, puts it well in his essay on fairy tales. The Gospels contain a story of a larger kind which embraces all the essence of fairy stories. They contain many marvels, peculiarly artistic, beautiful, and moving, mythical in their perfect, self-contained significance, and at the same time powerfully symbolic and allegorical. And among the marvels is the greatest and most complete eucatastrophe, which is his word for happy ending. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. To reject it leads either to sadness or to wrath, because this story is supreme and it is true. Art has been verified. God is the Lord of the angels and of men and of elves. Legend and history have met and fused. Mm-hmm. And so it's that idea of true myth that I find so compelling, because you have, the beauty and wonder of mythology, but that it's based in truth and fact, and it's a story that we're invited to live in.
What's that? Wow. And sometimes when you hear things that people write in, it's so beautiful, you're like, if I add anything, I'm just going to ruin it. So I hesitate to say something, but you guys paid to hear me say something, so I'm going to. And I'm having a hard time collecting my thoughts in light of, I've heard that quote before, but the way you said it, and given the fact that you said it, is just so important to me, to let it sink for a second. When I look at that idea of connection and art as connection, it takes me back to a thing before I was a Christian. I went to the movies. And I do believe, I see a lot of artistic expression in movies. Not just the visual part of it, but just the conceptual parts, the experiential parts of what movies bring. Whether it's the soundtrack and the score, or it's the acting, or the lines, or the visual that's being portrayed at the moment with the symbolism that comes with it, or the whole story coalescing at one particular point, or you happen to be in a certain mood when you happen to watch it. A movie that you found profound at one point, you watch it and you're like, why did I like this? Because you were in a mood at a particular time and it spoke to you at that particular place, where you were sitting with someone that meant something to you, and that connection happened because you both experienced at the same time. Art has a way of making you and the person next to you experience something that listening to, birds might not do. Or maybe that would do it. Who knows? There's a connection that happens there. Sitting in a movie theater, and I was watching a movie called Dead Man Walking. And the story of the movie is based on a guy named Matthew Poncelet, who murders, along with another guy, a couple in the woods, and he rapes the young lady before he ends her life. And he won't admit it. Now, he's been convicted of it, and he's going to go to the electric chair in Louisiana, lethal injection in Louisiana, because of this crime he committed. And he is like a neo-Nazi. He's just a detestable human being. And Helen Prejean, who is this nun, who comes to the prison, she sort of opposes the death penalty and wants to get not him pardoned from the crime, but doesn't want his execution to happen. In other words, turn it into life in prison. So she befriends him, and he finds her beautiful, not just by appearance, but really by her heart and by her love for him. And eventually she cajoles him, not in a conniving way, but in a way that's beautifully attractive and self-sacrificial, to admit what he did. He finally admits it. And then he gives his life to Jesus. Now, this is really ironic, because Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon made this movie. They're not super friends of conservative Christianity, yet they made this movie. And he gives his life to Jesus, and she calls him a son of God. You are now a son of God. And he is undone by this phrase. He's like, what? I've been called a son of a lot of things, but not this. That's a line from the movie, by the way. And at the end, now the hours are going, and the clock is ticking, and the time for him to die is minutes away. And he asked her, would you sing a song for me? And she said, I can't sing. I'm a terrible singer. He says, it doesn't matter, just sing something. And there's this scene where he's behind bars and she's on the other side. She grabs the bars and she presses her face, almost like she's trying to force herself through. to be with him. And she sings, "Be not afraid." And if you know the lyrics, it basically speaks of Jesus, though you pass through raging waters, you won't be drowned, you won't be harmed. Though the fires rage around you, you won't be harmed. Why? Because I go before you. Sorry. Because I can take it, and you can't. And I remember sitting in that audience. I was years from becoming a Christian, and I'm listening to this idea of this Savior taking the punishment for you. And I'm telling you, a tear left my eye, and I thought, if only that were true. And then later on, I found out that it was. There's a connection. You can give me propositional truths, and you can tell me Jesus died for your sins, and you can tell me the history behind the stuff. And that matters to me. That's the kind of way I'm built. But there's got to be that connection. And this movie made by two people who probably weren't intending for a Muslim to convert to Christ spoke to me in this way. And you can see it over and over again in various other movies where this gospel motif is told. I can give you examples, but time runs short. Of all these times when movies have told the gospel by accident, that's how powerful this story is, and it feeds right into what Josh was saying just now, is that there is this story arc, and we can't escape it, no matter how much we try, no matter how secular our media becomes, no matter how much we try to run away from this beauty. We tell the gospel story by accident because we are saturated by it, and we can't escape it, try as we might, because, again, to quote a poet, the hound of heaven is on your tail.
So well said, and we'll leave it there, and we'll open up for questions. And we have one question here. You don't need the mic, you're good.
Thank you so much, because both of you were stirring my mind, and something came to me in the midst of your explanations about beauty. I found that beauty is actually an intentional act by God, because it stirs you to actually have to think about the beauty. And when God said He created the universe for His glory, so we can see His glory, that we are now intentionally have to think, and we cannot deny the fact of the universe, that we have to, either we can reject it or accept it, but we have to now be intentional about thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you mentioned in your paintings, you know, looking at that flower, so if you're a molecular scientist or a botanist or just a lover of nature, you have to think of the design that's intentional in that beauty. And I keep thinking about that. Is beauty a basis in our subconscious to force us to think about something outside of ourselves? That design is not by chance, but there is intentionality in that beauty. Maybe if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to just chime in really quick. First of all, I think that's at least an aspect, if not a tremendously important aspect, is that beauty does have a way of making you think about stuff. By the way, the contrast does too. Ugliness has a way of making you think about things too. People ask the big why questions when they suffer. And sometimes grotesque images shock us. Why does it shock you? Because it is the privation of beauty. Grotesquerie is not, it can be a thing in of itself, but when you see something grotesque, the reason why it's grotesque is because it's in distinction to that which is beautiful. And you know, I was looking up something on my phone earlier, so I wasn't really playing Candy Crush or anything while Josh was speaking. I was looking up the scripture verse where Paul says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable," and he goes on, "if there is anything of excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things." So it causes us to think. And these things that are gross in life sometimes get us to think about that which is beautiful. And the beautiful gets us to think about that which is beautiful. So I think you're quite right in the idea of intentionality. I don't have this image here. I would love to show you this image. I don't have it. It's the image of a rose window from York Minster Cathedral. And a famous scientist showed this image, by the way, at Johns Hopkins University. He was talking about meaning in life. It was a rose window of York Minster Cathedral. It's quite beautiful. If you see it in person, it's way better than the picture I would showed you. It's gorgeous. It's this circular thing. It's a beautiful rose window. Then he showed a picture of what DNA looks like. When you look down the axis of the double helix, what it looks like, and it is stunning. It is the kind of thing where you actually go, what? And you look at it. And somehow, the rose window is the creation of an artist. And the DNA is the creation of an accident. And the DNA is the very thing that made the artist possible in the first place. So when you see that whipsaw effect, it causes you to think, accident really? Or artistry? And one last bit on this, and before I turn it over, is, again, movie. There's this movie called Contact. Maybe you saw this movie. It's based on a book by Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan, who was an agnostic, who wrestled with issues of science and faith all the time. If you watch the movie and read the book, it's really Carl's self-expression of his own agnosticism, trying to figure out what faith is really all about. So the main character, Ellie Arroway, goes off and meets aliens because of this machine that they built, but there's no evidence of her having visited it. And so everyone has to take her testimony on faith. But she knows she experienced something, so she wrestles with this. At the end of Contact, there's this sort of anticlimactic scene that I'm kind of disappointed by, frankly, given the profundity of the rest of the work. She's at the Very Large Array. The Very Large Array is an array of essentially telescopes and radioscopes that are looking into the universe for any signs of intelligent radio patterns. And she's giving a tour to these children. And so she comes to the end of the tour, and a kid raises a hand and asks a question and says, "Is there life out there?" Now she just talked to them, but she says, "I don't know, what do you think?" And which is a great way to have a conversation, by the way. And the kid says, "Well, I don't know." And she says, "Oh, good, you're a skeptic, I like that." And then she gets down to the child's level and she says, "The universe is bigger than anything anybody has ever imagined. So if it's just us, it seems like an awful waste of space." And I remember thinking, that's disappointing. It's a disappointing answer. Rather, when you look at the elegance in the way in which the universe is balanced, the fact that Jupiter exists as far as it does from our sun, the size it is, sucks in all these meteorites that would have killed us a long time ago. The fact that we're exactly where we are in the habitable zone, the amount of various chemicals and different things that are on this planet and on other planets that make this planet possible, and other solar systems, by the way, beyond our solar system, which make life on this planet possible. The perfect balance with which you see the universe actually acting so that we're exactly where we should be, so that we can see the things that we see, is amazing. How could it be a waste of space? And then you add in one additional thing, is that it's artistry. Maybe God doesn't need to create a universe this big. Maybe he just likes it because he shows off. He's like, I am really good at this. And this stuff is beautiful. Why not that? Anyway.
Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's
Okay.
pretty cool.
Well, we have a question right over here.
Just a couple things that come to mind. You mentioned the Garden of Eden. Thing that comes to my mind is, what is heaven going to be like? If this is beautiful, what we consider beautiful, what is heaven going to be like? And it's something that we can't really even comprehend at this juncture, But the thing that we're talking about beauty all night long. The thing that jumped out to me was, the adversary. When God created him, he was the most beautiful creature. Mm-hmm. And isn't it funny that he was the most beautiful creature, but yet he was also the most grotesque in the same sense, because of what he's done to mankind, led us astray from God. Just something.
I think that's what you were saying.
Yes. There's that interesting passage in Ezekiel 16 about how the spiritual being in the garden, the serpent, whether that was specifically Satan or not, it's a bit ambiguous, but in the traditionally it's believed to be so, and it says that he trusted in his beauty, and that was his downfall. And we read the book of Proverbs has quite a bit to say about how the beautiful woman can lead a man astray, or that charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. So then we have to kind of nuance beauty for its own sake isn't enough, and that's where I think some kind of formalist theories of art for art's sake can go wrong that way, because we're believing in just, you know, the beauty itself, the aesthetic forms, and so that's where, like, it talks about in Proverbs how, like, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which then allows us to put beauty in its proper place, and to be a signpost to God, the Creator, who is the author of beauty. But obviously, every good thing can be twisted and perverted. We see that obviously with anything in our world, even good things can be twisted. And so, that's we do have to be really careful. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah, it's well said, Nate.
My question is for Josh. You said you studied philosophy, and I was told you have a number of other degrees too, but my question is purely philosophical. We've been told since, we've been able to hear that God's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and I'm sure you've come across this paradox in your studies of philosophy, but have you heard the philosophical paradox of God and the stone?
God, and so
Meaning the stone that you can't lift.
So the idea of the paradox is very simple. It's can God create a stone that He Himself is unable to lift, right? And the idea of the paradox is that either way you go about that equation, it makes the idea of an all-powerful or omnipotent being impossible. Because if He can create a stone that He can't lift, He's not all-powerful because He can't lift the stone. And if He can't do it, then He's not all-powerful because He can't do something.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that, and I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from Christ.
I'll also let Abdu chime in, because I know he's studied philosophy in depth. So, like, essentially is the question, like, can there be a contradiction in God if God is the same yesterday, today, forever? That how could there be this contradiction or something God cannot do? I think there's a sense in which why, even like the problem of evil and suffering, why is that something that God allows? And that's a huge, obviously, discussion, and probably one of the greatest reasons for why people turn away from God. Why, if He had the power to stop this, why does He allow it? And I think ultimately, I'm not going to say I know the answer, but I think there's reasons for which God gives us free will, that we are able to choose destructive paths. I also think it's interesting that the nature of art itself requires, like, suffering and pain. Even, like, beauty itself, I think we can't really have beauty without the struggle. So are there reasons for which God allows that in order to bring about His redemptive purposes? Perhaps that's an answer. I don't know if that's fully satisfactory, because
I think that there's something in what you're saying here that's important relative to the paradox you're talking about. Is the paradox is actually resolved fairly straightforwardly by the definition of all-powerful. What do we mean by all-powerful? When we say He can do anything, that's ridiculous. Here's why it's ridiculous. Can God not exist? Of course not. God is consistent. God is the God of order and complete order. So God can't do something that is contrary to His nature. For example, the Bible outright says God cannot lie. Why does it say that? It says that because God is truth. You and I can lie because we're not truth. There is something of a privation, of a deficit in us that allows us, when we speak, to choose to lie. But God is, by very nature, truth. He can't be dark. There's no darkness in Him. Light can't be dark because light is, by definition, the antithesis of dark. So, can God create a stone He can't lift is actually an absurd statement. It's like, what it's like asking? It's like asking if God can create square circles, or if God can create married bachelors. Of course not, because by definition, a square has corners, and by definition, a circle has none. So God cannot create a square circle because that would be absurd. And to perform an absurdity would plunge the entire universe, and even God Himself, into rampant and irresolvable contradiction. And because God is a God of order, he therefore can't do things that are inherently logically absurd. Can he do the impossible? Oh yeah. Can he raise someone from the dead? Sure. Why? Because it's not logically absurd. But God is a God of logic. And if God does things that's logically absurd, he no longer is the God of logic. And so to be himself, he can't do the things that would be ridiculous. So I'm not saying the paradox is ridiculous. I'm saying it's a good thing because it drives us to understand what do we mean by these concepts in the first place. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Follow up. Go ahead.
Just to add to that, if God cannot do things outside of his nature, right? Like he's holy, there's no evil in him. You would agree that he can't lie, he's righteous, fully righteous, right?
Right.
Then this is another kind of weird thing to think about, but we are unable to create a perfect circle, right? As humans, we can't create a perfect circle. Even the machines we make cannot create perfect circles because we are imperfect, so we cannot create a perfect machine, right? So God being perfect in nature, wouldn't that stop him from being able to create anything imperfect? So with the idea of the angels, right, and the one that fell, the fallen one, and the third of the legion of angels that he took with him, if God created the angels to be perfect, how is it that there was evil in them? And how was it that it was able to come into existence? If God, since the beginning, has always been perfect, wouldn't anything that he created also be perfect? And we're told we're made in the image of God, but we're very imperfect.
Yeah. So a couple of things that are really important about that, about your question. Miguel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Miguel. A couple of things about the question. The response is a super deep question, and I really appreciate it. A couple of things about this is, one, God can't actually create another perfect being. Why? A perfect being needs nothing. It would be uncreated.
But didn't God come, like God the Father, come before the Son?
No, the Son is eternally generative of the Father. They're both eternal. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all eternal. Okay. So there's God the Son, and there's the Son of God. So Jesus, the actual physical body, was born. But notice something. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. The Son eternally exists. The Son was never born. Only the child was born. So God exists eternally. So God exists eternally. He never begins. He never began. For God to create a being as perfect as himself, that being has to begin. Because he created him. So God cannot create an uncreated being. That's like creating square circles and married bachelors once again. So the reason why God doesn't create morally perfect beings is because moral perfection is tied to the very nature of God being a perfect being. And everything else is derivative of the perfect being. So in some sense, it can never be fully perfect because God creates the thing in the first place. Now, can he create something like Jesus, who is, in his human body, still is subject to gravity and decay and hunger and sweat? Yeah, but the Son, God the Son, incarnate in the person of Jesus, never experiences any of those things. So I think we have to make sure what we do is when we wrestle with these conundrums, is wrestle with what's called a category mistake. Is that sometimes we talk about two things as if they're the same category, but they're not. It's like talking about the smell of the color of numbers. You know, those things are all categorically different from each other. Numbers don't smell like things, and they don't have colors in the first place, and colors don't have smells. So when we have these different categories, we have to make sure we keep our categories. They're not always neatly compartmentalized, but when they can be compartmentalized, we have to make sure to keep them distinct. So God being perfect doesn't mean that everything he creates ipso facto has to be perfect.
But if he has the power, if he's omnipotent and he has the power to stop suffering and sin and evil, right, and him being all powerful and all good, wouldn't it be against his nature to allow these things to exist?
So, I hope you don't mind if I keep going for a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. I'd love to hear your response on this stuff too, but the reason I'm going to go on for a second here, Miguel, I experienced this 7 months ago. My dad was murdered 7 months ago. And I don't say that to put you on the spot. I want to share something deep and important with you. The philosophers call what you just said the problem of evil. How can a good and all-living God and all-powerful God exist when a world where evil exists? It's the problem of evil. The interesting thing is, philosophically speaking, this has been answered like 5 different ways. So almost no philosopher actually thinks there's a logical problem. What they have is what's called the probabilistic problem. In a world where there's so much suffering, it's unlikely that God exists. Not that it's ipso facto contradictory that God exists. Most philosophers, I don't know a philosopher who thinks it's logically impossible.
I wasn't saying that.
No, I know and I totally get that. So please forgive me, hopefully not putting words in your mouth. I'm just saying, your question is such a powerful and profound one that everybody asks this question, no matter how strong your faith is. Because, and here's the thing, this is what I want to tell you. This goes right into the beauty thing, by the way, for a moment, if you'd let me do it, because it's the ugly privation of the beautiful. I don't call it the problem of evil anymore. I'm done calling it that. I'm through. Now, when you're touched by evil, the way I've been touched by it, it's not a problem anymore. It's a scandal. It is scandalous that a God who is all powerful and all loving allowed my dad to be murdered. It's a scandal. But it's scandalous the way he dealt with it. It is equally scandalous. If you're an atheist, you know what your answer is? Tough. I guess that's the way it goes. If you're a Muslim, it's a test. All these other things, it's a test. A friend of mine asked this question about his mother who died when he was 10. And wanted to know how God could value his mother and God could be good if he allowed his mother to die when he was 10. Powerful question. And there's a bunch of answers to this. One of those, I'll go philosophical, and then I'll make it practical, if you don't mind me doing so. The philosophical answer goes like this. There's a number of them, by the way. There's the soul-making theodicy. There's the free will theodicy. There's a million of these things. Yeah, there's a million of them. The one that I centered out my friend, and the one that I wrestle with quite a bit, and I find solace in, is that I asked my friend this question. I said, so we talk about God being all-powerful and all-good, right? We also think he's all-knowing. He said, yeah, if your God, because he's an atheist, he said, if your God exists, then he would be all-knowing. Okay, great. So he knows all the future, yeah, all the past, all the present, and all the possible future. In other words, what's called a counterfactual. You all could have chosen not to come here, and some of you were thinking, yeah, I really should have. You all could have chosen not to come here. And a billion different things could have happened because of that. The people you met, people you didn't meet, a billion different possibilities would have happened. The spiral of history could have been very different. And God knows what will happen and what would have happened. So I asked my friend, is it possible that a good, all-loving God, who's all-powerful, who knows all of that, could allow suffering to happen that works for a greater possible good in a world where free people exist and they have free will? He could allow for a greater possible good to happen in the future, even though we can't see it. Maybe it's 5 minutes from now, maybe it's 50,000 years from now. Who knows? At first he said, no, it's not possible. I said, well, wait a minute. If you're telling me it's not possible, then you're claiming to have infinite knowledge of the future. And if you have infinite knowledge of the future, you're using your infinite knowledge of the future to disclaim the idea of a being who has infinite knowledge of the future. Congratulations, you're God now. So he admitted it. Eventually, yeah, it could be possible that God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing suffering for a greater good that we don't know about. I said, does that comfort you? And he said, no. I said, me neither. It doesn't comfort me. You know what it is? It's a fancy way to say God works in mysterious ways. That's what it is. It's a fancy way of saying that. I said, anybody can tell you that. That's a theory that anybody can tell you. But I, as a Christian, can tell you something. It's more than theory for me. It's actual history. Because I believe God can use suffering for a greater possible good. Because God used his own suffering for the greatest possible good there could ever be. His son suffered. The father had to forsake the son. The son had to feel forsaken and be in that tomb for 3 days and rise from the dead for the salvation of the entire world. There can't be a greater possible good than that. So do I trust that God can use suffering for a greater possible good? Absolutely, because I have a history, a verifiable, provable history that God did use suffering for the greatest possible good. So I trust what happened to me will work out for some glorious purpose, because what happened to his own son worked out for some glorious purpose. What do I turn to? Where else would I go? What's better than this? There's literally nothing better than this. It is beautiful.
you, Abdu. That was beautiful, and I'm so sorry about your father. So I have a question for each of you. So I'll present the questions and then you can answer them. Josh, I'm curious. I know you and I saw the one of the whale at the hardest time in your life, but your other work is so deep and so thought-provoking that I'm curious what motivates your paintings. Like, I understand the whale one came from a very personal place, but the other ones, like, is it the revolution? What's the one, the Roman one?
The Republic.
The Republic.
Yeah.
Like, what motivates, and then what holds you for 8 months to stay focused on that particular story?
Yeah.
So that's your question. Abdu, my question to you is maybe deeper. So my belief of beauty is that God showed us his ultimate beauty in the Garden of Eden when he created perfect in his creation with Adam and Eve and just creation itself. Then when the serpent tempted and sin entered, beauty was tainted and had to be restored. So when Christ came, to me, God's perfect beauty is shown through Christ being our propitiation. And when Christ became our propitiation, beauty was restored. Our sin was covered through his blood. So my question to you is, as a Muslim and other religions, because it's only Christianity that shows the essence of that beauty, that Christ is the propitiation for sin, which destroyed ultimate beauty. What do Muslims see as a propitiation for their sin, for their wrongdoing? Like, when we're talking about beauty defined, when beauty is Christ's sacrifice on the cross being the propitiation, what is their beauty in terms of their sin? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then lastly, both of you, I would like you to just define beauty. What each of you would say would be your definition of beauty.
Okay, so just because you brought it up near the end, I was going to mention to Miguel's question earlier just how it is interesting that the central image or the most popular painted scene of Western art history is the crucifixion, and it's really a very ugly scene. It's obviously Roman crucifixion. I was just watching the Passion of the Christ film, which I've watched multiple times, and it truly shows you how gruesome that was. But that Christ takes on not just the sin of the world, but the ugliness of the world, and then that's our ugliness that's on display, humanity's, and then his beauty then is transferred onto us, his righteousness onto us. And so I just wanted to say that's been an image that with the problem of evil and suffering that I can personally point to, that God incarnate comes to earth to suffer, to experience the full depths of the human condition, and that gives me great solace. In my art, the theme of suffering is very prevalent, and finding beauty in the brokenness has been a recurring motif. When you see these remnants of human civilization, like that Greek temple crumbling, really the idea behind that, or whether that be like the peeling paint or the abandoned barns that I've painted, it's really to show the finitude of humanity, that Job says that nations rise and fall, and how these things are all temporary. And so it can be very tempting to just paint beautiful things, but the reality is that in this realm, everything that's beautiful is fading away, it's decaying, and But can there be beauty in that because it points to something of ultimate perfection that we long for, that the new Eden, that this earth is going to be restored and renewed. So that's very much driving force behind my art. It's very much like a visual diary of things I'm thinking through and pondering and wrestling with. The painting you were referring to earlier is titled Whale Hymn. It's in my book, Streams in the Wasteland. And it's this scene of a humpbacked whale swimming through an abandoned Gothic cathedral that's like this aquarium. And I was thinking about the psalm which says how the ocean creatures give praise to God, their creator, and that at that time I was going through very intensive treatment for chronic Lyme disease. My whole family actually contracted it when we lived in Russia. And this painting was very therapeutic and just a reminder of giving praise, just as, these humpback whales who have these haunting chants, these songs that they sing and pass on from generation to generation, that this is also the song that I should be singing of praise. So my work kind of I guess is a balance of seeing like the fallenness and brokenness of the world, but also like signs of hope and of restoration.
All right, so second question was to me, and it was about where do Muslims find this idea of beauty in a sort of a salvation story kind of a thing, for their sins or propitiation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Where is the hope beyond their sin? Like what do they do? How do they solve the problem of their sin, their wrongdoing?
So a couple of things about this is that you can go to the beauty part of it. I think every religious system has a recognition of an understanding of what is beautiful, and that wouldn't surprise me, by the way, because human beings have this sort of imago Dei, no matter what religion they happen to be. I think this is not working. I'm loud enough, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So a Muslim, there is a God, see? So a Muslim would say a couple of things, is that one, the ineffably beautiful expression of Islam is actually the Quran itself. The holy book of the Muslims is considered by Muslims to be incomparably beautiful. And a lot of it does rhyme, actually. It's not one big poem, but it's kind of one big poem, which is why so many are able to memorize it so easily. But they would say that the beauty is not only in the expression, but in the content itself. I do think that that's a bit of a subjective issue, because the beauty existing is one thing, but is this beautiful? Some say yes, some say no, for various reasons. But when it comes to the sin question, what they would look to is a couple of things. First, the Quran very specifically says in 2 places that no bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another. So if I bear my own burdens of sin, and this is referencing the judgment. It says no one can bear your burdens for you. You are going to bear your own burdens. You're going to be judged for what you've done, good and bad, and no one can do it for you. It says it twice. No bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another. So you have to stand before God based on good works in a cosmic scale, I think Surah 85, where the good works are weighed against the bad works. And whatever is found heavy is what determines your destiny. However, the other part of the beauty for Muslims, to be fair and completely fair to them, is to say that God's mercy acts in this whole situation. In fact, that God being merciful is one of, if not the most common name for God in the Quran. It is at least one of, if not the most common name. Every chapter of the Quran, except for one, begins with the phrase, in the name of God, the beneficent, or the gracious, the merciful. He is Ar-Rahim. So he is over, and he's called oft forgiving and most merciful. So what they would say, a Muslim would have to say, based on the corpus of the Quran and the Hadith literature, is that a Muslim can come to salvation if they do enough good deeds, and they fall short, because they're going to, because they're not perfect, and then God looks upon their deeds and the sincerity of their heart and grants them mercy based on their effort and the sincerity of their heart. And they find that beautiful. I get that. My issue, though, is twofold. The first thing is that I struggle with it because, and I struggle with it as a Muslim, by the way, too, because there is something of a conundrum that I think is unsolvable. Because by definition, mercy is that which you do not deserve. That's what mercy is. You don't deserve it. And yet, how do you get God's mercy? You have to be sorry enough and do enough things. So you earn it, which makes it not mercy. It makes it wages. So no matter how you look at it, it is a works-based system. Which goes back to the phrase, no bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another. Well, if that's the case, and the Quran also says in Surah 35, verse 45, that if God were to judge humanity according to what it deserves, he would not leave on the back of the earth even one living thing. That's how bad your and my sin is. So you see the predicament here is that if mercy is earned, which means it's not really mercy, it's wages, you will get what you deserve, and no bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another, and your burden is so great that the world should be destroyed for your sin alone, how do you get saved? Here's the beauty of the situation. The Quran says, no bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another. And that's where Jesus comes in, because he has no sin. He bears no burdens of his own, which means he can bear mine. And that's where I think the beauty is. In the Christian message, this goes to that I think the Christian message speaks in a way, it affirms the quest everyone has, regardless of their religion. But it says, that's a good quest, that's a good question. I have an answer. And I think it's a better one than even you think yours has. So it affirms the question. It fills in a gap that I think every other system of belief either leaves wide open and leaves it as a mystery, or doesn't even recognize. Yeah. You have a third question, I think, though, too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear what how both of you define beauty
Oh, that's
in
right.
like one sentence.
We have another question here, and I only have time for like one or two more questions, just to keep it short, so if you don't mind.
Yeah, big question,
Go for it.
and it's an important one, and maybe one we should have tackled earlier.
Yeah, more definitional.
But beauty is like defining art. It's one of those things that it constantly gets refined and debated upon. But I think I'll stick to how the Bible defines beauty, which is very interesting because we have to recognize that beauty has been defined in a modern sense so differently that it historically has been. And I brought up Immanuel Kant. He's definitely one of the key figures who created, and even with people like Alexander Baumgarten and Hume, this idea of aesthetics, that something could be contemplated just for its beauty, without any specific purpose, art for art's sake. That's actually a very foreign idea outside of Western cultures. And so we go further back, because I can't cover obviously how all non-Western cultures have understood beauty, but from a biblical understanding, beauty is very much aligned with the fittingness, that there's this orderliness of beauty, that it's not just something that's visually pleasing. Obviously there's passages that connote that, like the trees in the Garden of Eden were pleasing to the eye, or a woman's attractiveness or a man's physical appearance that is beautiful. But as I said earlier, in Ecclesiastes, that God has made everything beautiful in its time, and so there's like a purposeness that's there, and so it's expansive. I think there is an element to it that it's pleasing to our senses, but I think it can also be intellectually pleasing and appealing at the same time.
Do you want to just take 20 seconds?
Yeah, maybe I can just summarize what Josh said, because I heard that there's so much there that, well, you can run out of that alone. But it's a huge topic, but let me summarize it and say it this way. I think of something being beautiful, and this is sort of paraphrase C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis famously said that reason is the natural organ of truth. Imagination is the natural organ of meaning. And beauty comes from imagination. And I would say, I summarize, beauty is that which points us to truth in a meaningful way, which wraps up all the faculties that are a part of beauty. So meaning has got to be infused in the idea of beauty.
Yeah.
We've talked this evening about things that are beautiful.
Mhm.
My question is, where does it come from?
Mhm.
And I have come to conclude this, that beauty is not intrinsic, it is perceived.
Okay.
And in order to perceive it, we have to have the ability to perceive it. God gave us that ability.
Mhm.
Without that ability given to us by God, we wouldn't be able to understand beauty.
Yeah.
So, part of that understanding of beauty is that it is God-given ability to perceive what is beautiful in our society, about God, about all the things that He created, etc. Would you agree?
Let me say, let me go first and you can wrap up. I would say, I appreciate your question and the way you put it. I would say, I agree semi, but mostly. What I would say is, I do think beauty is an objective thing that exists and it's intrinsic in God. And I think you're agreeing with me. I think that our ability to perceive it is a beautifully given gift. And because that's a beautifully given gift, beauty therefore is intrinsic in the one who gives it.
Yes.
And we as receivers are beautified by it. A friend of mine once called it there's a word for this, it's called transmogrification. It sounds like an ugly word actually, but it's actually a beautiful word. Basically what it means is, when you look at something that's beautiful, and it's so beautiful that it beautifies you because you saw it in the first place. There's only one source of transmogrification, and it's God. Which is why Moses couldn't look at it. I mean, because it's like, the beauty is so incomprehensible, you would lose your mind if you saw it, kind of a thing. But visible light spectrum, right? So we talked about this earlier. There's a light spectrum, infrared, ultraviolet. We only see a fraction of it, and we were given eyes to see it. If human beings had no eyes, would light still exist? Yeah. We couldn't see it. So I think our perception of beauty is like our eyes. It is the given gift to be able to perceive that which is real. But its beauty still existed even if we couldn't see it. So I think the beautiful gift is that we can see it in the first place. So I appreciate your question very much so.
Yeah, and all I would just add, I think we're all on the same page here, but that beauty is not solely just for humans, and it's not something that if we can't perceive it, like you're saying, with ultraviolet rays, where bees can see colors that we can't, and the fact that there is this idea, like going back to Plato, that beauty is like this formal ideal, and that everything physical is just a shadow of that, or a copy. And I think that's actually an incorrect way of viewing beauty, because I think from a biblical standpoint that God is the master artist, and everything He creates is infused with beauty, that there is an intrinsic value for every specific plant species and animal species. And that there's obviously like scripture, which is special revelation, but that there's general revelation, and this mystical theologian Meister Eckhart said that every animal is like a page in God's book of revelation, of knowing who He is, even as humans are His crowning achievement of creation. But I don't want to lose the intrinsic value of beauty outside of just cognitive perception of it, as it's something that is ideal, but that it's something that's embodied and can be experienced in its
I wasn't trying to suggest that beauty doesn't exist if it cannot be perceived.
Okay.
That isn't what I was trying to say. Animals look at things around them. They may not determine that these things are beautiful, but God intended them to be beautiful.
Right.
And He gave us the perception to appreciate what He has done in that beauty.
Yeah, I think we all agree with that.
That's right. That's the image
Yeah.
of God.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Wow. I think we could stay here another couple hours, but I know I've got to get some sleep.